If I were to say to you that the world as we know it today, just even your local community, the neighborhood that you live in, the school that your kids attend, maybe the house of worship that you attend, are not the same that they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I don't think anybody would argue with that. If I were to say exactly the same thing maybe 2 years ago or 6 months ago, would you agree that we've seen almost as much radical transformation of our society in the last 24 months that we've seen in the last 60 or the last 120 months, the last 10 years of our life? I think we've seen as much radical transformation of what our society looks like, especially for leaders, in the last 2 years than we've seen in the last 10 years. So here's my question for you. As leaders, as it continues to shift and change, and what you once thought was solid ground continues to move perhaps out from under your feet, and you find yourself standing on quicksand, where will you stand as it continues to change? Where will you find solid ground for your conversations? Welcome to Leading Leaders Podcast, 5-minute videos, 5 days a week. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. We've seen just in less than 2 months, we've seen social media accounts completely closed. We've seen people whose voices have been heard and prominent, some for good reasons, some for questionable reasons, but they've been altogether silenced. They've been removed from the stage, so to speak. I picture the old shepherd's hook thing with the talent show or the gong show where someone is singing, where they're doing a recital of a speech, and it's just horrible. And the big shepherd's hook comes out and it snatches around their neck and drags them off the stage. That's kind of what I'm picturing now. But it's not enough that it would be those in the political limelight or those even in the entertainment limelight. It's now moms and dads. It's now the guy next door or the one down the street or the pastor of the local church or the other houses of worship. And if you disagree with the mainstream conversation, then what you're saying could be silenced. I think we find ourselves in a perilous time as leaders because there are some things about leadership, about the expectations of leadership, that cause we as leaders to think differently than the average person. That's why we've been asked to assume that role, or we've migrated to the role of leadership, because the way we think is different than the average person. Now, I'm not saying leaders are anything unique or special other than to say the way we think, the things we think about, the amount of time we spend thinking causes us to be a little bit different than just the average Joe. That can be a great advantage, but in a time when thinking alone causes you to be a target, it can be perilous. We do know that throughout history, whether scientists like Albert Einstein or great thinkers of psychology and human psychiatry have been ostracized, they've been poked fun at. Don't look back at Nostradamus and some of the things that when he first came up with some of his ideas about the earth being round, there were people who thought he was absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. And had there been social media then, I wonder if people like Einstein or even, the creation of things like electricity, whether it was Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Edison that first put it into play, it would have been an argument, right? I mean, who would have thought that the telephone with Alexander Graham Bell would have been delayed only because somebody else created it but didn't get to the patent office fast enough? See, if those arguments, if you will, if those races of the mind had happened in today's social media, I wonder which of them would have been snatched off of social media, whose opinions and ideas and voices would have been silenced because they didn't concur. I can tell you there are many of my friends today who I know in person-to-person conversations have a lot to say, a lot of ideas and a lot of opinions and a lot of thoughts, whether they're political or social or business or inventions. But they're reluctant to put them out in the public because of the reaction of the public, because they're terrified perhaps of the shepherd's hook, of being silenced, of being told your opinions don't count here, or they're not of value here, or they don't follow the status quo, and so what you have to say needs to be said nowhere. I wonder how many of us will find a place, maybe it's at a coffee shop in the public, where everybody's phone is left in the car so Siri can't listen or Google can't listen. And unless you think I'm crazy, because I know some people don't, but we've seen the memes that say my wife and I were talking the other day and the phone responded. Well, it's happened to me. I remember walking in the door not too long ago, and my boys were asking me what's for dinner, and I said, I don't know, I wasn't planning to cook. And the minute I opened my phone, there was a Facebook ad for DoorDash. So to think that my phone isn't listening is just crazy. But I can tell you another experience. I was visiting my sister not too long ago. There was music playing in the background. I wasn't paying much attention to it. But then I said something and the music went off completely. Went completely silent. And I didn't think of any correlation between what I said and the music. I just noticed that as I was talking, the music went quiet. A couple of minutes later, I asked my sister what happened to the music, and she said, oh, I don't know. And then she said, Google, play music. Nothing happened. She said it again. Nothing happened. I said, well, Google was probably mad that I said X, Y, Z. As the words were coming out of my mouth, her Google Home device started talking, and what it said was, for security reasons, Google doesn't listen to your conversations until you start the sentence with, hey, Google. And I thought it's ironic that you would know to reply with your security disclaimer if you weren't listening in the first place, because I didn't start with, hey, Google. Again, we find ourselves in a place where even our conversations at home, our conversations at the coffee shop, over donuts, anywhere that our phone exists is being listened to. Maybe you saw it in the news just yesterday. Instagram is now targeting direct messaging. I'm not talking about what you put out in the public that might incite a riot or something of that nature. I'm talking about a private conversation between two people is now being monitored for certain keywords. Yeah, like SEO, like search engine optimization. And if these words come up in your conversation, then you will be monitored and you will be watched and you may be depersoned. Delisted, canceled. Well, no, what's the right word? Oh, removed from the platform. Silenced. Dragged away in the dark of night is the way they used to do it. The world we're living in is changing. And it's changing faster today than it was 3 days ago, 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago, 3 years ago. It's changing faster today than any of us could have ever imagined. So my other question to you, the same question to you, asked again from another perspective is, where will you stand? Where will you stand to have the conversation about your new ideas, about your innovations, about your relationships, about things that really matter to you, to your family, to your politics, to your faith? Where will you stand as a leader to have those conversations where you're not being monitored 24/7 and tracked and ranked based on what you have to say? Have you heard about the ESG score? If you haven't, look it up. ESG. Environment, Social, Government. It really just is a classification like your credit score that says these are the ways that they stand. This is where they stand on these subjects. This is where they stand on this concept or this idea. This is where they stand in relationship to politics. And it can be detrimental to your hiring career. It can be detrimental to your getting into school or not. It can be detrimental to your finances, whether the bank will loan you money or not. I recently saw an article that said that a particular manufacturer of cold weather gear refused to make cold weather gear for another company because the company was involved in the oil and gas industry. That's just straight up bias. We don't like what you do for a living, so we're not going to sell you our product. Where do you stand? As a leader, as a parent, as a community influencer, where do you stand? And if it all continues to change like this and the shepherd's hook continues to come for more of us, where will you stand? I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith